Hi guys, welcome to vlearnias. The video you have seen has gone viral yesterday. The video shows that a woman has been beaten in toll plaza in Madhya Pradesh. So this is the situation of women at the workplace in our country. So there are many issues regarding workplace harassment. Sexual harassment is a main offense, but look at this. Even in toll plaza or this type of physical harassment also impede women from reaching to their workplace and work safely. So already we have said certain legal measures like Visha guidelines by Supreme Court, then post committees there, prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. Everything is there, but all are in paper. Nothing is implemented. So this can be taken as an example where you can write about women's issues, women's safety. So on this backdrop, I invite you to today's editorial discussion and news analysis dated 22 August 2022. So welcome all. So let's look into what is the first news for today's discussion. Data protection. So we know that recently the data protection bill in the parliament has been removed off. So let's look into what is the issue, why such bill has been moved out of the parliament. So let's look into what is the context. So recently there was a withdrawal of personal data protection bill from the parliament. For the last 5 years, lot of efforts were put in for the creation of such a bill, but it was abruptly removed from the parliament. So let's look into what is the origin of that bill in the parliament. So in between 2017 and 2018, a 10-member committee was appointed under the leadership of Supreme Court judge of that time. Under the leadership of the Supreme Court judge, a data protection bill was drafted out. This was later sent to a joint parliamentary committee for scrutiny. So it is after this scrutiny, this joint parliamentary committee recommended several amendments. Following this bill was moved out of the parliament. So now let's look into what would be the future of our privacy regulation in India post this removal of this bill. Okay. So one way to understand the decision is to go back to the genesis of the law. How this law originated, what is the genesis of the law? The law's genesis came after famous case of Supreme Court Justice K.S. Puttasamy and Union of India case. So why this is a hallmark case in judiciary? Because it is in this case the judiciary upheld the right to privacy and had both a positive and negative aspect. So it held the right to privacy as a fundamental right in this famous case. So on the positive aspect, it implies that there is a need for state to actively take measures to protect individuals' privacy. Thus, government was more or less forced to initiate drafting of a data protection law. So whenever you study the constitution part, any positive application means that government is forced to promote something. For example, reservation policy, which is mainly carried out for a promotion of weaker section of government. At the same time, if the government is forced to prohibit something, then it is on a negative side. For example, it is on negative liberty. For example, government can suspend or can have measures in constraining certain rights, like right to travel to certain areas, which prohibits from traveling to certain areas. So such liberty is known as negative liberty. So the other liberty which helps in the promotion or development of an individual is known as positive liberty. So now what happened is that after the right to privacy judgment in the J.S. Puttasamy case, the government was forced to promote the privacy angle in the data protection. So on the background of this, government initiated data protection bill initially in the parliament. So, in the case, the Puttasamy case was a hallmark case. It stressed upon several aspects following this case. So, after this Puttasamy case, the court stressed upon the increasing use of day-to-day technology, which can cause a potential claim on the privacy. Government had implied on that. Court also held that the informational privacy that an individual holds, that means the right of an individual to hold his information, also have an implication over his privacy matters also. For example, we know that we are in information age. So if you share a data or some particular personal data, it have an aspect of our privacy also. So God had looked upon that aspect also. And above all, it enlarged the scope of Article 21 of our Constitution. That means fundamental right of our Constitution, right to life. So it further expanded right to life article to include right to privacy on its ambit. Thus, post these changes, the Personal Data Protection Bill was introduced in Lok Sabha by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology in 2019. This bill is famously known as Privacy Bill since it intended to protect individual rights. How it helped in protecting individual rights by their collection, movement, and processing of data. Thus, from the data point of view, this right to protection will have an impact over the collection of data, over the movement or transfer of data, and also on the processing of data. So it has an implication on all the three aspects of data. Okay, this was the main objective of this personal data protection bill. With the introduction of this data bill, it was challenged upon several grounds. From several perspectives, this bill was challenged. First and foremost is the physical location of the data. So whether the data is physically available within the jurisdiction or not, this encryption of keys, that means it is a type of key that is available to decode the data. That key may be available outside the jurisdiction of data. So data's protection or secrecy is compromised at this point. Another aspect is of national security. We all know that the huge amount of data, especially population or demographic data, that we store within a single 10-digit number like Aadhaar, has huge national security implication. Then another criticism is by tech giants like Facebook and Google regarding data localization. So there is a provision within this bill that the data collected within the country should be kept within the jurisdiction of country. That means in the server of within the country. It cannot be transferred without permission from one country to another country. So it will has a huge cost implication to big giants like Facebook and Google, which will further increase the cost of their processing. So they have also criticized on this ground. Also, it may backfire India's startup culture. It will reduce the or it will degrade the existing startup culture that was arising in India. So now we look into why such a withdrawal was done to the bill. So what are the reasons why such a bill was withdrawn? First and foremost reason that is cited is that the Joint Parliamentary Committee, which was made to look upon the bill, suggested too many amendments. So already there was a bill in the form given by a committee under Supreme Court. So it was given to Joint Parliamentary Committee. The committee suggested around 81 amendments. So 81 amendments were suggested to this bill. This already altered the basic nature of the bill that was drafted. So such a whole change necessitated them to withdraw the bill and introduce a new bill again, the coming session of the parliament. Another reason which is suggested is that the current bill which was under the scrutiny was too much compliance burden. That means if we start a company, the company was too much compelled to appoint so many appointees like data protection authority, like data compliance officer, like that. So many compliance intensity was very high, which is not easy for startup ecosystem to survive in our country. Then the issue of data localization. So already it was criticized by big data giants like Facebook, Apple, and everyone. So such a data localization can push the cost of data processing for these companies. Another aspect is that part nature of data should be localized, whether critical personal data or normal data should be localized. There was a small argument on that. On that backdrop, this bill was withdrawn. Then pushback from stakeholders. So there was a major pushback from several stakeholders like big tech companies like Facebook and Google and privacy and civil society activities. Then delay in implementation. There was a huge delay in the bill criticized by several stakeholders, pointing out that it was a matter of grave concern that India did not have basic framework to protect people's privacy. There was huge delay in its implementation. So, now let us look into what this joint parliamentary committee recommended. So, what was the overall summary of recommendation they gave? So, there was almost 81 amendments suggested by joint parliamentary committee, which helped it mainly stressed on expanding the scope of the proposed law and to cover the non-personal data also in its ambit. Currently, the importance was given to only personal data like our date of birth, iris scan, like that. This non-personal data was also should be considered. So what do you mean by this non-personal data? It is a set of data that does not contain any personally identified information. So any information which do not have an information regarding your personal identity is known as non-personal data. Also, the committee suggested changes in the regulation of social media companies used only trusted hardware in smartphone. That means they also suggested a change in the regulation of social media and also the current smartphones on which hardware should be used. So it proposed that social media companies that do not act as an intermediary should be treated as content publishers and making them liable for the content they host. So there are many social media intermediaries like Facebook, Twitter, etc. So the law suggested that to make them liable for the data they publish. So instead of the person who actually originates the data, the publishers also will now be liable for the data they publish. This was another provision which was suggested by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. Now, what is the scope of this law? So, what is the scope of bringing a privacy law in our country? First and foremost, it is a boost to digital economy. We know that post-COVID there was a huge increase in our digital economy. So, in our digital education, telehealth, everything is going digital. So, this data protection bill or privacy bill will boost the digital economy of our country. Further, it will give incentives to several stakeholders like the state, industry, and other advocacy groups. Uh, for example, our domestic industry, such a law is very much essential. Privacy law is very much essential, so that it can increase its ease of doing business in our country, and also comply with international standard. So for the state also, it is a matter of security issue. Apart from that, it is a geopolitical, strategic, and regulatory interest is also involved. So this is the main scope of this data protection bill. So what is the way forward? So the author is suggesting that we must look upon the two critical issues. First is what will be the new form of the new law. Another is the nature of protection it will offer. So author is saying that for the way out we must look upon what will be the new law and what will be the nature of this law. We must look into these two aspects. So the author is suggesting that the new data protection law must contain multiple legislation. That means it must be in a right approach to the digital ecosystem, having multiple legislation for multiple objectives. For example, in the data case, if it is an issue of privacy, there should be a data law for privacy. If it's an issue of surveillance, then there should be separate law or for this data surveillance, or something regarding security of our country, there should be separate law for data security of our country. So bringing a all in one big law which contains all these objectives will be a compliance burden for both this digital ecosystem as well as the state also. So the author is suggesting that there should be multiple law for the multiple objectives. The second suggestion is that the nature of the law. The current data privacy protection law is majorly borrowed from the European General Data Protection Regulation. So it is an important framework of data protection which is drafted among the European Union nations. So it is very highly complex, and compliance burden is very high on this framework. So it is not suitable for India's capacity, and there is regulatory constraints regarding this. So these issues must be first sorted out, and the new data privacy law should be in a proper manner, which should be adapted to India's digital ecosystem. This is what we can conclude in this data protection bill. Okay. So when a question comes on this data protection bill, especially in the main point of view, you must have note on the significance of this bill on the social aspect. For example, our population data and its implication. Second is on our economy, digital economy focused. Then comes our security issues. So these aspects should be covered up in a comprehensive manner and should look upon the what are the limitations or criticism over it. So I have given a comprehensive discussion on this. Please study it regularly or repeatedly study this topic. Okay. So the author is suggesting certain steps that should be taken by developing the new law. The first one is it should be a risk-based approach to data protection. That means it should look upon the risk of having a potential data breach. So that approach will firstly take care of the vulnerable data. So look upon the vulnerable data sectors and whether there is any potential data harm will be occurring. Likewise, they will look upon. Example is cyber crime domain. Second aspect is that there should be a risk assessment. So for that there should be a co-regulation and self-regulation. So promoting self-regulation will reduce the compliance burden. So more and more firms will be adopted to this data regulation. The third is accountability measures. So the company should be made accountable for their data protection compliance. And then fourth is the law is being drafted. The government should have proper investment in building their administrative capacity. So government should not wait till the law is drafted. Before that, they should develop a good administrative capacity so that when it will get drafted, it can be implemented properly. This was initially carried out in SEBI and PFRDA Act before they were given good administrative capacity even before their drafting of their bill. And apart from that, the new law should be transparent and meaningful after consultation with all the stakeholders. So it should be a risk-based approach and should have a risk assessment following co-regulation and self-regulation, should have accountability measures, then should provide an increased administrative capacity and should be transparent and meaningful. So this should be the main framework for the new law that is being developed in the coming section of Parliament. So on this background, just look into some of the previous year question that was asked. So this was a question which was a very simple one. The right to privacy is protected under which article of the Constitution of India? So it is a very easy question. We already discussed. It is protected under which article? Article 21 of the Constitution of India on the fundamental rights. So in the Pottaswamy case, right to privacy was declared as fundamental rights by Supreme Court, and it was given under personal liberty and under Article 21 of the Constitution. The next question that was asked is about in 2018. Right to privacy is protected as an intrinsic part of right to life and personal liberty. So already the statement is given. And it is asked that which of the following is the Constitution of India correctly and appropriately imply the above statement? This is also an easy question. So we already know that Article 21 is the main article. So Article 21 then and the freedom guaranteed in Part 3. This is the main article that implies to right to privacy. So it was an easy question. So this is the explanation for that. Please look into it. Now there was a main question that year. The question is, examine the scope of fundamental right in the light of latest judgment of Supreme Court's right to privacy. So this is a question typical UPSC mains question which is asking your opinion or significance of a particular aspect of constitution. So if you look into this framework of this question, first of all an introduction should be given based on contextualization. That means on what context this right to privacy came into being. So you must look upon this Puttaswamy judgment and right to privacy and Article 21 of the Constitution. Then we look into how this judgment, that means right to privacy judgment, have an influence to or enhance the scope of fundamental rights. How it enhances the scope of fundamental rights. So we can first and foremost on this question we can look into the philosophical aspect. If that is a main philosophy of liberty has been enhanced. Then our current social context, how this right to privacy, example social empowerment aspect can be added upon. Then we can also look into upon our economic justice side also. Political justice and economic justice also added. Like this you can expand this question and you can write a good answer. So this is the main framework on which you can write the answer on this question. Okay, this was all about that discussion. Now let's look into the next news for today's discussion. So next news is about freebie culture in our country. The news is already we have discussed a few days back. Again it is in news. Now let's look into what is the issue right now. So there was a debate over giving up of freebies and welfare. So what is this freebies and welfare debate? This freebies is nothing that anything that is given without any cost. So this can include free electricity, free water, free public transportation, waiver of pending utility bill, farm loan waivers, etc. So why such a behavior is criticized? Because it can potentially undermine the credit culture of our state. It can distort prices. It can have a crop subsidization. For example, it mainly occurs in railway sector. Mainly the profit that we make from the goods sector is cross subsidized to the passenger sector. So this can have a huge impact or drop in our labor force participation and disincentivize our work culture also. At the same time, what is this welfare? It is an expenditure on which brings economic benefit. That means anything which brings about economic benefit is known as welfare. For example, it includes public distribution system, employment guarantee schemes, state support for education and health. These all are welfare aspects. Then why India is spending too much on welfare or freebies? So the debate is arising that is India spending too much on welfare or freebies? First of all, there is a decline in the spending of our welfare. This is evident from the studies of RBI that social sector expenditure at the state level has been declining. Next is health and education. The allocation to health and education by the sectors of state is declining. Then there is another Reserve Bank of India about the physical situation of our states, where more and more states are getting more debt with increase their physical pressure. Low spending on welfare scheme. So there's a trend of low spending on welfare scheme, especially on the health and education side. India is having only about 4.7% of its GDP spending on welfare scheme. At the same time, in sub-Saharan countries, there is around 7% of the welfare scheme spending. So what should be the solution for this? First and foremost is spend more on welfare scheme so that it can promote the human resource of our country. This is very much essential for our economic growth. Then is public expenditure efficiency. We must have a look upon the efficiency of the expenditure. So we are already spending money for the public, but we must look upon what aspect or how much money is spent on the efficiency of the money spent to the public. Next is better resources. We needed to have a good tax framework. We should avoid tax evasion and several other issues and should maintain a debt sustainability framework. Let's look into next news for today's discussion. Next news is about a small news regarding that All India Institute of Medical Science, the premier medical institution in our country, is taking the names of heroes of that particular region where it is located. Why such a move? So that it can attract local population to that area. So that more and more affordable and quality health delivery can be given. This is a very good approach by the aims, so that more and more poor people can approach these aims, and it is a emotive approach actually. Okay, so let's look into next news. So next news is about an international example where Singapore will repeat the law against gay sex. So it is a transformative social law. So India should also can adopt from this framework to make the society more inclusive and uphold the minority right in our country. So it is important. You can take this as an international example. Okay. So this is all about today's discussion. So hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel for the future discussion. Thank you.